So you want to play Grey Knights, Warhammer 40,000. That's what we're going to explore in this podcast. And I'm trying to start at level 0. The idea is in 40K, compared to other war games, there's a lot of units. There are a lot of paths, a lot of choices on your way in terms of tactics and building an army. But for each of the various factions, based on a combination of rules from the big rule book and stat line versus abilities, there's this DNA. There's certain factors that are going to be at play for your select army, regardless of what you're playing. And we explored looking at Space Marines. We explored looking at Tyranids, Chaos Space Marines, and now we're making our way to Grey Knights. And we're going to look at Necrons, and of course, a couple of the other factions that I enjoy playing in 40K, trying to leverage what makes the army good to win and being aware of the deficiencies that you're going to face. So Grey Knights, right away, they're Space Marines. They're going to go down like Space Marines. And I need to pull in a little bit of the Tactica because Grey Knights share a similar DNA, not only in the narrative, but also stat-wise. In 40K right now, at this point in 8th edition, an armor save is not worth as much, and that's before we even get into the AP system. A lot of just basic guns, basic DACA, have the ability to throw down modifiers on the AP, plus the amount of units that you're physically going to face on the table is going to put out a lot. So if you go into playing Space Marines thinking that your armor save is going to save you, it's not. I'd like us to think, and this is a little bit harsh, but we're going to be invoking the litanies of hate. I'd like us to think of armor saves as when you screw up, a way to keep the army going when you make a mistake. If you are making mass amounts of armor saves, we have to revisit tactics. And that's true for when I play Marines and Power Armor. So that's in the makeup on there. Grey Knights can afford this even less because they're so expensive on there. And it's harder to achieve critical mass on the table. Now, I define critical model mass as based on the level of the game that you're playing, enough models to achieve mission objectives. And by that, I mean whatever mission you're playing, and every turn your army's going to get weaker and weaker and weaker because you're taking losses, even if you make all the correct tactical choices, even if you have the ability to outplay your opponent. Because we are playing on a physical gaming table with limitations, you're stuck on that table for the battle, essentially given the scope where the gaming table is a little bit too small for how 40K has evolved. You're going to get shot at, you're going to get assaulted, random things are going to happen on there. You're going to be getting weaker every single turn. So you need enough model mass to make sure as you take losses, intentional or unintentional, you can inflict similar losses on your opponent or greater, and you can win the mission. Grey Knights, we've talked about this idea of an elite army, elite meaning smaller model count on there. It's challenging. So the first question is, you need ways to transport your figures, your units, to protect them from incoming fire, to essentially put up additional wounds. You know, that's kind of how rhinos and razorbacks are these days. It's essentially like you're taking a unit, and this is what you're going to mech up, and you're adding potential wounds onto it. You're increasing the wound counter on there. And yes, they can operate independently, but for the most part, it is to protect you till you get into that position where now you can leverage your guns or your assault ability, whatever that's going to be. So you really need that bottle to wrap yourself in, or you need a way to suddenly appear on the table. That could be fast transport, that could be deep striking in, that could be alternate ways of entry on there. But really, essentially, you want to try and get the jump on your opponent and inflict the maximum amount of damage. So whatever units you're looking at, that's where we want to select. Now, Grey Knights are interesting because, and again, we're talking very, very top level on here. We're not getting into specific units, but the DNA of those units influences things. Grey Knights are interesting because while every unit, every model, every army can put out some interesting combos and utilize them. On a side note, these days, when I play Chaos Space Marines, it feels like I'm playing Eldar back in 4th edition. And what I mean by that is you had these units, these Eldar units that worked very, very well. The aspects were dedicated for what they were supposed to do, meaning if you took Dark Reapers and pointed them at Space Marines vanished. If you pointed them at Imperial Guard, they kind of laughed it off. Congratulations, you killed 12 guardsmen in a single turn. I've got like 100 more. So if you were going against guardsmen, you kind of had to assault them with scorpions and, really, really leverage on lots of wounds, lots of assault, and return, have the aspect armor protect you. So you had to really match things up, and then you used your psychic powers to boost those units through the roof. And Chaos these days, even playing my Berserker list, it just has that feel. And ironically, Eldar feel like Space Marines from the previous edition. I don't think this is intentional by Games Workshop. I think it's just how the rules are evolving in 8th, and as they pile on more models and expand the game, it's just where it's going. Side observation on that, but I say that because while every army can throw down some interesting combos, Grey Knights, like Space Marines, do a little bit of everything really well. But the difference is individual units of Grey Knights, we want to take advantage of every phase, meaning through the movement phase, I want to, and again, this is, you have to implement this, I want to be in a position on the gaming table where I can shoot psychic power and assault effectively every single turn. Every option that the Grey Knights have in the individual units, no matter what you're taking, I need to leverage those every turn. I just need to, because they're pricey and I'm power armor. And even if I'm really, really good on the points, which admittedly building armies, I tend to go a little overboard on the bling and custom stuff. But even if you're going to rein me in and be like, Fritz, be 100% competitive, Grey Knights have to keep these factors in mind. The final layer on there, as you build your list, if you've been following my podcasts, you know when it comes to Marines, there's just certain units that I love. They are iconic. I love Assault Marines. I love this idea of Thunderhawk gunship flying over, the doors open, and just lots and lots of Assault Marines start pouring down, and they land, and bolt pistols and chainswords. I love Dreadnoughts. I love Land Raiders. I love Terminators. That's not to say I don't play other units. I love Vindicators on there. But in my mind, these are the iconic units for Space Marines. I say that because there's nothing wrong with taking these units, but let's look at a Dreadnought. There are some slight tweaks here and there, depending if we're looking at a generic Marine Dreadnought, a Grey Knight Dreadnought, or, well, Blood Angel's got some variants on there, but even maybe like a Blood Angel variant on there. Slight tweaks, but it's not unique, specifically unique to the book on there. Same with Land Raiders and things like that. So what you want to look at more than anything with Grey Knights, what are the Marine units? Yes, you're going to need a backbone of possibly Terminators, Power Armor, Grey Knights, things like that. But what are the units that are unique to the Grey Knight army faction itself? And how can we leverage those tactics? Because we're building off of essentially, a Space Marine stat line, Space Marine profile. But building on that, we want to build on things that only the Grey Knights can uniquely take advantage of. So I'm not saying don't play these other units. Don't play kind of Imperium units that you find across other codexes. I mean, in my Grey Knight list, I've got 2 Land Raiders. I've got Dreads. I love them on there. But be open to possibly exploring and unlocking things that other army factions don't necessarily get. That's the starting point. That's the checklist. Those are the questions. So the next step now, as you select your units and maybe look to build your collection or tactically how you're going to utilize these Grey Knights, that's where now we start to look and say, okay, based on this checklist of questions, how does that layer over and how does that layer on what you're selecting? That's going to be the backbone to leverage the starting tactics for your army. And then from there, we build on the specific tactics of the units that you're selecting on the table. And again, this is true for every type of army. Now, some should say maybe I should have started with Necrons first. I pushed out the Space Marines because a lot of players play Space Marines, and there's a good chance listening to this podcast, you play Space Marines? You know someone that plays Space Marines? Or according to the Games Workshop secret sauce formula, you will be playing Space Marines. So I felt like, we needed to start with that. Then I don't see many Tyranid armies on the table anymore. I know it's just my local meta that has no bearing in the 40K universe. So I felt like the space bugs, they needed a little bit of love. Then, of course, we had to hit Chaos up. We're hitting Grey Knights up. So it's good, bouncing back and forth. Now we're ready to get into the Space Undead. And look at Necrons, because not only have Necrons changed over the years, but there's a couple of really core options where we want to half play Necrons like Space Marines, but the other half we don't on there. And it's a very, very fine line, I find it, when you mentally cross over and start playing the army like Marines. Specifically, they don't shine. You leave yourself open to some things. So again, we want to kind of get this backbone DNA starting point for 40K, and we will see where things go and where things take us. And some of the comments like, Fritz, you should have started with Eldar. Like, yeah, I probably should have, right? But we're just trying to go through and push that up there. Eldar, we're going to look at what I call generic Eldar. We're going to look at Samhan focused specifically, just because that's, if anything's my DNA back from Way of Samhan, that's what it is. And then we will jump into Harlequins. The Space Clowns demand it. And I still enjoy playing Harlequins. But what's interesting with Harlequins, on a finishing note here, what's interesting about Harlequins is it feels like I'm playing almost a fusion of Kill Team and more skirmish 40K, even though it's on a mass scale battle. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's maybe like Assassins. It's very, very surgical. There's a couple of key units and key powers that you need to have in the right place at the right time. I mean, beyond Glass Cannon, you just need to occupy certain points on the table and certain game turns when your opponent's trying to do something. And that's what makes or breaks Harlequins, what I see on a very top high level. That's what makes or breaks them almost regardless of how you're building out your list. And out of all the armies, and it's not a question of experience on here, because certainly I go through phases where I'm playing more armies regularly. You know, I'll play Tyranids for a while, I'll play Chaos for a while. But even when I'm in that mode and I'm in that narrative of this is the army I'm playing, I do make sure, just to stay frosty, that I'm getting a couple of plays of all my other armies, even if we're not pushing things up to my blog or my YouTube channel here directly. I've been playing Harlequins, and I have to say, that is probably perhaps the most radical and the most challenging army that I've played and I continue to play. And again, not that this is adjunct of anything in my meta where I play. I'm the only Harlequin player, and it's not like I've got, a lock on the army and stuff on there. So I wonder, in terms of play, how many of you are playing the Clowns in 8th edition, which further compounds it a little bit. So slightly off topic, but Grey Knights pushing this up to the channel, and we're going to approach the other factions in 40K from this DNA top level perspective. These are the points you need to keep in mind if you're thinking about playing this type of army.